The first time Caleb Walker called me his husband, his mother was lying in a hospital bed, and I was too afraid to ask why the lie sounded so natural in his mouth. He's family, Caleb had told the nurse, one hand gripping the edge of the front desk while the other rested between my shoulder blades. The nurse glanced at her clipboard. Immediate family only. Caleb did not hesitate. He's my husband. For one strange second, the bright hallway went silent around me. The vending machine stopped humming. The rubber soles of passing nurses faded away. Even my own breathing seemed to pause, as if my body needed time to decide whether hearing those words was a dream or a particularly cruel joke. Caleb looked at me then, his amber eyes wide with a warning that said, "Please do not make this harder." So I nodded. The nurse handed me a visitor sticker, and just like that, after 16 years of friendship and nearly 10 years of loving him in secret, I became Caleb Walker's husband for the length of a hospital wristband. His mother, Linda, had collapsed that afternoon at the old lakeside lodge the Walkers were restoring. She had skipped lunch, ignored the July heat, and spent 6 hours arranging furniture as if the grand opening depended entirely on the placement of 3 blue armchairs. The doctor said it was dehydration and exhaustion, nothing more serious, but Caleb had gone pale the moment he saw her on the floor. Caleb was the kind of man who could rebuild a staircase without instructions and carry a 60-pound cabinet by himself, but fear made him helpless. That was why I stayed close. It was what I had always done. Inside Linda's room, Caleb stood beside her bed while I filled a paper cup with water. She opened her eyes, smiled weakly, and looked from him to me. "Both my boys," she murmured. Then her gaze dropped to the visitor sticker on my shirt. Husband of patient's son had been written beneath my name in hurried blue ink. Her tired face lit up. "Finally," she whispered. Caleb froze. I nearly dropped the cup. "Mom," he began, but she reached for his hand. "I knew you two would figure it out someday." The relief in her voice stopped him. Linda had spent the last year trying to save the lodge after Caleb's grandfather passed away. She had carried grief, bills, and everyone else's expectations without complaint. Now she looked happier than I had seen her in months. Caleb glanced at me, and in that look was an entire conversation we were too frightened to have aloud. "Just until she feels better," his expression seemed to say. I gave the smallest nod. Linda squeezed our hands together and closed her eyes again. Caleb's thumb rested against my knuckles. Neither of us moved. That evening, after Linda was admitted overnight for observation, Caleb drove us back to the lodge in silence. The lake reflected the last orange light of sunset, and the unfinished porch smelled of cut cedar and summer rain. Caleb went upstairs to call his aunt. I stayed in the kitchen, searching his jacket for the truck keys. Instead, my fingers found an old Polaroid tucked inside his wallet. It showed 2 17-year-old boys sitting on the dock, shoulders pressed together, laughing at something beyond the frame. Caleb had kept it for 10 years. On the back, in his uneven handwriting, were 7 words that made my heart forget how to protect itself. The summer, everything almost changed for us. Caleb came down 20 minutes later, rubbing one hand over the back of his neck, and found me standing beside the kitchen window with the Polaroid still in my hand. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The old lodge creaked around us as the evening cooled, and somewhere beyond the porch, frogs had begun their steady chorus along the lake. Caleb looked at the photograph, then at me. "You went through my wallet?" I was looking for the truck keys. "They are on the hook by the door." I glanced toward the hook, where the keys were hanging in plain sight. "That is an inconvenient detail." He almost smiled, but his eyes stayed on the picture. I forgot that was in there. It was a terrible lie. The edges were softened from years of being carried, and a pale crease ran across one corner where the leather had pressed against it. I turned the photograph over again, reading the words even though I had already memorized them. What almost changed? Caleb reached for it, but I held it just beyond his fingers. "Nothing," he said. "Then why write it down?" We were 17. Everything felt dramatic. He finally took the picture from me and slid it back into his wallet with more care than the answer deserved. I wanted to ask whether he remembered that night on the dock, when the power had gone out across half the county and we had watched the stars appear over the water. I wanted to ask if he remembered leaning against me until our friends called from the bonfire. Instead, I handed him his jacket. "Your mother thinks we are married." Caleb exhaled. "I know." She looked ready to plan our anniversary before the doctor left the room. She was medicated. She was more alert than either of us. He leaned against the counter, exhaustion settling into his shoulders. I will explain tomorrow. The next morning, Linda explained for us. By 9 o'clock, she had called Caleb's aunt, her bridge club, the bakery owner, and apparently half of Alder Bay. When we arrived to bring her home, the nurses congratulated us. A volunteer offered Caleb a pamphlet about spousal caregiving. Linda sat in a wheelchair by the entrance, smiling like she had personally arranged the entire misunderstanding. I knew you two needed time, she said as we approached. Caleb stopped beside her. Mom, about that. Her smile softened. I am sorry you felt you had to keep it private. You should tell people when you are ready, not when they demand it. The words caught him off guard. They caught me too. Linda reached for my hand. I am just glad he chose someone who has always known how to bring him home. Caleb looked at me, and something unreadable moved across his face. He did not correct her. Neither did I. On the drive back, he kept both hands tight on the steering wheel. Just until the opening, he said. 4 weeks. Mom rests. The lodge opens. And then we tell everyone there was a misunderstanding. A 4-week misunderstanding. We have survived worse. I looked out at the highway, at the green field sliding past beneath a clear July sky. We need rules. Definitely. Separate rooms. Obviously. No inventing romantic stories. Agreed. No. Unnecessary touching. Caleb glanced at me. Define unnecessary. My pulse stumbled, but I kept my voice even. You know exactly what it means. He smiled then, warm and familiar enough to make the whole idea dangerous. Back at the lodge, Linda insisted we use her parents' old wedding bands because, as Caleb quietly repeated to me, people notice hands. He stood across from me in the kitchen and slid the silver ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. His thumb brushed my knuckle, and neither of us moved. For weeks, I reminded myself. Caleb cleared his throat. Looks convincing. I looked at the ring, then at him. That is what worries me. By the third morning, pretending had already begun to rearrange the shape of our days. Caleb woke before sunrise to work on the porch, and I found a mug of black tea waiting beside my laptop with 2 slices of lemon and exactly 1 spoonful of honey. He had remembered the way I drank it in college, even though I had never once asked him to make it. I carried the mug outside and found him kneeling beside a stack of cedar boards, measuring twice before marking each cut. You know this is how rumors start, I said. He looked up. By making tea? By being thoughtful before 7 in the morning. I am your husband now. I have standards. The word landed between us with enough weight to make both of us look away. Caleb returned to his measurements, and I sat on the top step with my recorder, capturing the scrape of pencil on wood, the steady hum of cicadas, and the soft rhythm of the lake against the dock. Those sounds were supposed to become part of my podcast project, a collection of ordinary noises people rarely noticed until they were gone. Caleb glanced at the recorder. You are recording me working? I am recording craftsmanship. That sounds more flattering. Do not get used to it. Later, we drove into town for supplies. Linda had made a list that included fresh towels, curtain rods, paint samples, and something she had written only as tasteful pillows, which Caleb claimed was not a real category. At the home store, we argued over blue and gray bedding for 15 minutes while an elderly clerk watched us with growing amusement. You should let your husband choose, she finally told Caleb. He has better color sense. Caleb placed a hand over his heart. I restore 19th century houses. And yet you pick brown pillows, I said. The clerk nodded at me as if we had formed an alliance. Caleb bought the blue ones. On the way back, we stopped at the farmer's market, where Linda had apparently informed every vendor within a 5-mile radius about our marriage. We received free peaches, a jar of strawberry preserves, and more congratulations than I could answer without feeling dishonest. Caleb handled it with surprising ease. His hands settled lightly at the center of my back whenever someone stepped too close, guiding me through the crowd with a touch so familiar that I almost forgot it was part of the act. At dinner that evening, Caleb's aunt asked how we had fallen in love. I prepared to invent something harmless, perhaps a story about a rainy night and a broken-down car. Caleb answered first. It was not one moment, he said. Evan showed up. He always did. The table grew quiet. He spoke about the winter my mother moved away and I spent every afternoon at his house. He remembered the 6-mile bicycle ride I made in a thunderstorm when he was sick at 17. He remembered the night Walter died, when I sat beside him on the kitchen floor until morning because he could not face the empty house alone. Caleb smiled down at his plate. At some point, I stopped imagining important days without him there. Everyone at the table looked at us as though they had just heard the most romantic story in the world. I looked at Caleb, waiting for the joke that would turn it back into friendship. It never came. Under the table, his knee rested against mine. Neither of us moved away. The next morning, I carried my recording equipment into Walter's old study, a narrow room at the back of the lodge that still smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and the peppermint candies he used to keep in his desk. Caleb had spent the early hours repairing window frames, and the steady tap of his hammer traveled through the walls while I sorted through 3 cardboard boxes of cassette tapes. Walter had labeled most of them in careful block letters. Family Christmas, Lake Storms, Caleb age 9, Linda singing badly. I smiled at that one and set it aside for later. Near the bottom of the final box, I found a tape marked Summer, 10 years ago. No names, no date, just those 3 words. I placed it in the old cassette player and pressed the button. Static filled the room, followed by water moving gently beneath the dock. Then came laughter, younger and brighter than I remembered. Mine. Caleb's. I stopped breathing. "You are recording again," 17-year-old Caleb said through the speaker. "Walter says people forget the ordinary parts first," my younger voice answered. "Then record something important." There was a pause, followed by the creak of dock boards. "Do you think a person can feel like home before you know what home means?" Young Caleb asked. My hand froze above the machine. I remembered that night. The power had gone out across Alder Bay, and everyone had gathered by the water because the lodge was too warm without air conditioning. Caleb and I had slipped away from the bonfire and sat at the end of the dock beneath a sky crowded with stars. I had thought he was about to tell me something. I had almost told him everything. On the tape, my younger self inhaled slowly. "Caleb, I think I need to tell you." A chorus of distant voices interrupted, calling us back toward the lodge. The recording shifted, then dissolved into static. I pressed stop before the tape could continue. "Find anything embarrassing?" Caleb stood in the doorway, a streak of sawdust across his cheek. I removed the cassette before he could see the label. "Only evidence that your mother once sang every verse of American Pie without knowing half the words." "That sounds like her." His eyes moved to my closed fist. "What is that?" "Nothing useful." The answer came too quickly. Caleb studied me for a moment, then glanced toward the driveway as tires crunched over gravel. A green pickup truck stopped beside the porch, and a woman stepped out carrying rolled blueprints under one arm. She was tall, with dark hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck and bright red glasses that made her look both serious and amused. "That is Sophie Bennett," Caleb said. "She is handling the landscaping." Sophie entered the study 10 minutes later, shook my hand, and immediately noticed the recorder, the tapes, and the careful way I had arranged them. "You are the sound guy," she said. "And the husband, apparently." Caleb nearly dropped the box he was carrying. I laughed before I could stop myself. Sophie looked between us, then smiled as if she had already understood far more than either of us wanted her to. Later, while Caleb measured the garden path outside, Sophie helped me carry equipment to the porch. "You love him," she said quietly. I almost missed a step. That is a direct opening line. I design gardens. I notice what grows where people pretend nothing was planted. I looked toward Caleb. He was kneeling in the sunlight, focused on his measurements, unaware that my oldest secret had just been spoken aloud by a stranger. "He is my best friend," I said. Sophie nodded. That was not my question. Sophie invited me to the outdoor movie night 2 days later, and Caleb reacted as if she had asked me to help move across the country. "Tonight," he said, standing in the kitchen with a tape measure clipped to his belt. "That is what people usually mean by movie night," Sophie replied. I kept my eyes on the box of audio cables in front of me. "It is just a movie." Caleb opened the refrigerator, stared inside without taking anything, then closed it again. "I know that. You look surprised." "I am not surprised." Sophie folded her arms. "You look deeply surprised." He ignored her and turned to me. "The folding chairs are uncomfortable. I have survived chairs before. The left one in the shed leans. Then I will take the right one." By 6 o'clock, Caleb had repaired both chairs, tightened every screw, added new canvas straps, and placed a folded blanket over mine even though the evening was still nearly 80 degrees. He also packed a cooler with lemonade, apple slices, and the caramel popcorn I liked, then claimed he had only made extra by accident. The movie was an old romantic comedy projected onto the side of the community center. Families spread blankets across the grass while children chased fireflies near the fence. Sophie sat on my left. Caleb appeared 5 minutes before the opening credits and dropped into the chair on my right. "I thought you were working," I said. "Finished early. You said the porch would take all night." "I work efficiently." Sophie looked at the sawdust still caught in his hair. Clearly, halfway through the film, the temperature dipped, and Caleb placed the blanket across my knees before I could reach for it. When Sophie leaned over to whisper a joke, Caleb offered me popcorn at exactly the same moment, holding the bag between us like a small, unnecessary wall. I began to notice the pattern. Every time Sophie asked me a question, Caleb found something I needed. Lemonade, a napkin, more blanket, a reminder that the mosquitoes were worse near her side of the lawn. I should have found it funny. Instead, Hope started making dangerous suggestions. After the credits, Marcus Hill joined us near the parking lot. He looked at Caleb carrying my chair under one arm and my recorder case under the other. "You two already look like you have been married for 10 years, he said. Sophie smiled. I waited. Caleb laughed too quickly. "Evan is my best friend. That is all." The words were ordinary. I had heard versions of them for years. Worked in separate rooms. The next day, we ate breakfast at different times. Our easy messages became practical questions about paint and delivery schedules. Still, when my headphones stopped working, I found them repaired beside my laptop. When Caleb's favorite work shirt tore at the shoulder, I stitched it after he went to bed and left it hanging outside his door. We had stopped talking about what mattered, but we kept caring for each other in the only language neither of us was brave enough to misunderstand. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was recording rain against the study window. The subject line was simple: Portland production offer. I read it 3 times before opening the attachment, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less important. The job was real. A full season of a nationally distributed podcast, 12 months of steady work, my own production budget, and the chance to build the kind of audio stories I had been imagining since college. I should have felt only excited. Instead, the first thing I did was look toward the hallway and listen for Caleb's footsteps. He was outside with a contractor, reviewing the final estimate for the dock. I closed the laptop before he came in. At lunch, he noticed immediately. "You are quiet." "I am eating." "You are usually opinionated while eating." "That sounds ungrateful." He smiled, but the smile did not last. "Did something happen?" I looked at the ringless hand resting beside my plate. "Nothing I cannot handle." That afternoon, Sophie found me behind the lodge, staring at the lake with the offer letter folded in my pocket. I told her because telling Caleb felt impossible. "Are you going?" she asked. "I think so." "Does he know?" I shook my head. Sophie looked toward the porch, where Caleb was carrying lumber beneath the late afternoon sun. "You both keep calling silence kindness." "Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is fear with better manners." Before I could answer, Caleb's truck pulled away from the house. He returned an hour later with a man in a navy polo shirt and polished brown shoes. They walked the property slowly, discussing square footage, road access, and shoreline permits. I stayed inside, pretending not to listen. After the man left, I found a business card on the kitchen counter from North Shore Development. "Who was that?" I asked. Caleb opened a drawer and placed the card inside. "Nobody important." Nobody important measured the parking lot. He leaned against the sink. "They made an offer on the lodge." "You are selling?" "I did not say that." "Were you going to?" When I knew what I was doing. His voice was calm, but something guarded had entered it. "The debt is worse than Mom realizes. Selling would clear everything." "And your plan?" "Plans change." The words struck harder than they should have. I thought of Portland, still hidden in my pocket. "Apparently." Caleb looked at me. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." "You keep saying that." "Because you keep asking questions you do not answer yourself." We stood across the kitchen with 6 feet of tile between us, both of us holding truths that might have changed the conversation if either had been brave enough to speak. Caleb looked away first. That evening, Linda found us eating in silence at opposite ends of the table. She watched us for a moment, then placed down her fork. "Pretending was supposed to make things simpler," she said. "You boys have somehow turned it into the most honest lie I have ever seen." Neither of us responded. Later, I found Caleb asleep in the workshop chair with the North Shore offer open on his lap. Beside it was a legal pad covered in numbers, every version of the future ending in red ink. I draped his jacket over him and noticed my repaired headphones resting on the workbench. On the way upstairs, I opened the Portland email again and clicked accept. The confirmation appeared immediately. 1 month from now, I would be gone. I told myself I was choosing my future. The ache in my chest felt like leaving it behind. The lodge opening arrived beneath a sky so clear it seemed almost unfair. By noon, the porch was lined with white flowers, the new railings shone in the sunlight, and music drifted across the lawn toward the lake. Linda moved carefully between guests with a glass of lemonade in one hand, accepting compliments as if she had built every wall herself. Caleb and I worked on opposite sides of the celebration. He checked tables, lights, and food deliveries. I tested the speakers and recorded the sounds of conversation for the lodge archive. Whenever our paths crossed, we exchanged practical words and polite smiles. We had become very good at looking fine. Just before sunset, Linda called everyone toward the dock. 2 chairs had been placed beneath an arch of summer greenery, and a small table held a wooden box, 2 cards, and the silver rings. My stomach tightened. "Mom," Caleb said quietly. "What is this?" Linda smiled. "Nothing official. Just a blessing for the first couple to begin a new chapter here." Applause rose from the lawn. Caleb looked at me, apology and panic crossing his face at once. There was no graceful way to refuse without exposing everything. We sat beneath the arch while Linda handed us the cards. "Write one promise," she said. "Not something perfect. Something true." Around us, the lake reflected the evening light. I stared at the blank card until the words formed on their own. "I promise I will never ask you to become someone you are not just so I can feel chosen." My hand trembled slightly as I finished. Caleb read over my shoulder before I could cover it. His expression changed, but he said nothing. On his own card, he wrote slowly, then folded it before I could see. Linda asked me to read first. I looked at Caleb and spoke the promise aloud. The guests heard devotion. Caleb seemed to hear goodbye. When Linda turned to him, he held the folded card between both hands. "I cannot read mine yet," he said. A few people laughed softly, thinking he was overwhelmed. I knew better. After the ceremony, we escaped to the empty kitchen while music continued outside. Caleb placed his card in his shirt pocket. "We should stop," he said. "Stop what?" "This. The rings. The story. All of it." I forced myself to breathe evenly. "The opening is not over. It does not matter anymore." "Why now?" He looked toward the window instead of at me. "Because pretending is starting to cost too much." I thought of Portland. I thought of the developer's offer and the future he had not shared with me. "Then we agree." The words came out quieter than I intended. I removed the silver ring and placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around it. For 1 second, I waited for him to give it back. He did not. "Evan," he said, but there was no sentence after my name. I nodded as if he had finished. "Tell Linda we decided to keep things private." Then I walked upstairs and began packing. Through the floorboards, I could hear laughter, glasses touching, and the distant music of a celebration built around a promise neither of us had been brave enough to keep. The storm arrived after midnight, sudden and heavy, drumming against the roof hard enough to wake me. For a few seconds, I lay still in the dark, listening to the rain and the low roll of thunder over the lake. Then I heard water hitting the floor below. I ran downstairs and found a thin stream slipping beneath the study door. Caleb was already there, barefoot, carrying towels and a flashlight. "The window frame gave out," he said. "The boxes are getting wet." We worked without arguing. He moved the heavier crates while I lifted tapes and notebooks onto the desk. Rain blew through the damaged window, cold against my face, and the old room filled with the smell of wet wood and dust. One of Walter's storage boxes slipped from the shelf and opened across the floor. The Polaroid landed near my foot. Beside it lay the silver ring I had returned, Caleb's folded promise card, and my small handheld recorder. The recorder was on. A red light blinked through the dim room. "Did you use this?" I asked. Caleb stopped moving. His face changed before he answered. "Evan, do not." I pressed play. Static came first, followed by Caleb's voice, quieter than I had ever heard it. "I have tried to say this 6 times, and every version sounds wrong." There was a long breath. "I kept calling you my best friend because it was the safest true thing I knew how to say. But it stopped being the whole truth a long time ago." My hands went cold. The recording continued. Caleb spoke about the people he had dated, about how every relationship had felt incomplete because he compared every conversation to the ones he had with me. He said he had spent years thinking love was supposed to arrive like certainty, when maybe it had arrived through ordinary things instead. Tea before sunrise, repaired headphones, long drives home, someone waiting in the kitchen after a bad day. I do not know what this means about every part of me, his recorded voice said. I only know that when I imagine losing him, everything I have built feels empty. The message ended with a click. Rain filled the silence. I looked at Caleb. He was standing near the broken window, soaked through, his expression stripped of every defense I had ever known. I unfolded the card. His handwriting was uneven. I promise I will stop asking you to stay in ways that let me pretend I do not need you. My throat tightened. When did you record this? Yesterday. Why did you not send it? Because you had already decided to leave. You never asked me. You never told me. The truth of it settled between us. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded Portland confirmation. Caleb read the first line and looked up. 1 month. I nodded. I thought you were selling. I thought you wanted a life that did not include this place. I wanted a life that included you. His voice broke on the final word. For the first time, Caleb did not look away. He picked up the silver ring from the floor and held it between us, not offering it, not hiding it. I do not know exactly what to call myself, he said, but I know what I call home. Outside, the storm continued across the lake. Inside, every secret we had mistaken for protection stood open between us. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Rainwater gathered beneath the broken window. The recorder lay silent between us, and Caleb held the silver ring as though it contained every year we had failed to understand. I need you to hear me clearly, I said. I have loved you for a long time, but I will not become another secret you are afraid to name. Caleb nodded, his eyes fixed on mine. You will not. And I am still going to Portland. I know. I cannot give up the first real chance I have had to build the work I want. I would never ask. You too. His answer came without hesitation, and something inside me finally loosened. Caleb stepped closer, stopping before the space between us disappeared. I do not have every answer tonight, he said. I do not know which word will make this easier to explain, but I know I want to try. Not because you are leaving, not because I am afraid of being alone, because every future I have ever wanted already had you somewhere inside it. I looked down at the ring in his hand. That one belonged to the lie. Then I will keep it until we have something true to replace it. He did not slide it onto my finger. He closed his hand around it and waited. That choice mattered more than any perfect speech. I reached for him, and we stood beneath the leaking roof with our foreheads resting together, smiling through the kind of tears that arrive when relief finally finds a place to land. By morning, the storm had passed. We told Linda the truth over coffee on the porch. She listened without interrupting, then looked at Caleb and said, "So you are not married?" Caleb glanced at me. "Not yet." Linda smiled into her cup as though this was exactly the answer she had expected. The following month moved quickly. Caleb rejected the developer's offer and worked with Marcus to create a smaller repayment plan for the lodge. I helped him launch weekend events that brought in enough reservations to keep the doors open. Then I packed my car for Portland. At the end of the driveway, Caleb handed me a wooden case he had made for my recorder. Inside the lid, he had carved one sentence: "For all the things we are finally brave enough to say." We did not pretend the distance would be easy. We scheduled calls, missed some, apologized, visited when we could, and learned that choosing each other was not one grand decision, but 100 ordinary ones made again and again. 1 year later, I returned to Alder Bay to record the final episode of my podcast. The lodge was full of summer light, laughter, and guests arriving for the weekend. Caleb met me at the dock wearing the same nervous smile he had worn when he first placed the silver ring on my hand. He opened his palm. The old ring rested there. "This one was for pretending," he said. Then he opened a small wooden box containing a new band. "This one is for choosing." Our wedding was held beside the lake at sunset, with Linda crying before the music even started and Sophie claiming she had predicted everything. When Caleb read his vows, his voice shook, but he did not look away. Later, I placed a fresh Polaroid beside the old one. On the back, Caleb wrote, "The safest place I know, and the bravest life I ever chose." As the evening settled over the water, I turned on my recorder. It captured the waves beneath the dock, our families laughing behind us, and Caleb quietly saying my name. Once, I had believed memories mattered because they preserved what was gone. That night, I understood they could also preserve the moment something finally began.